After all of the work put into making Mistress's beautiful cabin sole and getting them epoxy coated properly, it was time for the last stage, the polyurethane coating. The tanks are not rickety rocking. I'm just going to explain what these little packers are for. Nothing's ever perfect. I'll be spraying the polyurethane onto these. I am a bit nervous actually because so the only thing that remains is to put the polyurethane coating on top. That's a relatively quick and easy job because I can put 3 coats on in one day, and on the last coat I'll be using this powder which is non-skid. So this will be the non-slip product that I'll be using. Being a complete novice to the polyurethane coating product that I was going to be using for Mistress's top coating, I just made sure that I was very up to date and conversant with all of the instructions, and so I read all that I could, what actually was for the 3rd time, just before diving into using the product. Well, onto the top coating for these cabin sole parts, and I'm using the same company product, Boat Coat or Boatcraft International. This is quite unique, this top coat. It's actually a polyurethane, however, it's water-based. It is a 2-pack, but it's not really in the normal 2-pack ingredients, and you can probably hear things flapping around. The actual temperature is just so nice at the moment. It's quite overcast, and we've got this southeasterly breeze. It is so welcome after all of the hot weather that we've had. And the other part that's required for this is what they call the cross linker, and it only needs to be added at a rate of 1.5% of the volume that's going to be used. So very small quantity of the cross linker. That's not all. The other surprising thing about it is this cross linker works to catalyse the water-based polyurethane, but it has a use by date of between 4 and 6 hours. So you might think, like most paints, if you've mixed it up, that it will cure after a certain amount of time. This doesn't do that. The cross linker basically denatures and deactivates. So what the company actually advises, if you've mixed up a volume that you're not going to use, don't worry about it. Tip it back into the contents. It can be used later by adding more cross linker. Fancy stuff really. And the other great thing about it being water-based is that the health concerns are minimal. There's no noxious volatile vapours. You can use it in a confined space. So it really is a great product, but beyond that, it's had tests done and it's proven to be as hard and durable as mineral-based polyurethanes. I think that's pretty cool. So what I need to do next to complete these panels is, like other polyurethanes, this can be applied soon after the prior coat. I'm going to be putting 3 sprayed on coats. Then I will allow approximately 24 hours. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make windows, or if you like, balanced shapes per panel, which will have an additive of non-skid. And the non-skid is pretty much like a powder. It's not coarse crystals like sand. It has been used by the company, by people in both interior and exterior applications. I've actually seen it on some of their boats, and despite looking quite small and powdery, it actually gives a really nice grip which won't actually shred your skin should you fall over. I think it's going to be excellent for this cabin sole inside. I'm not going to be using this outside on the deck. I do want something else, which I do already have in mind. The other thing about it is you can actually adjust the amount that you want to add, or you can apply more than one coat to increase the grippiness. I will only put 1 coat down, the reason being that it does just slightly obscure what's beneath it, Not much, a little, but as you can imagine, I don't really want to cover up all this beautiful finished rosewood and beech. And that's part of the reason too why I'm not going to apply this over the whole lot. I'm going to make windows so that you can still see the beauty of these panels. So that's the plan. That's nice. I'll explain why I say that. The tanks are not rickety rocking. It wasn't much, this one more than the port one, but I'm just going to explain what these little packers are for, which I didn't really explain in last week's video. So what that was all about is the tanks were made very well, the boats pretty much made quite well, but in the process, nothing's ever perfect. Don't we all know that? When the tanks were made, I think like when welding any material, things move a little bit. That's what's happened with the tanks. They did move a little bit. I'm not worried about it at all. And as can be seen by the thicknesses of these spacers or bearers, it's not much. They're fairly thin. And what it's going to do is it's just going to fill in some voids between where the hull floors meet the tanks and the bottom of the tanks. In last week's video, you would have seen some little blocks that were on the outboard end of the hull floors where that tank sits, which means that the water tank, where it's over the top of the hull floors, is not in complete contact with the hull floors. Once again, I'm not worried about that because these tanks are so strong within their own structure, and that's what I wanted. I wanted them to be self-supporting. There are 4 baffles inside of each tank which coincide with where the hull floors are. They're the same thickness as the tanks themselves, which is 12 millimeters or half an inch, which also, as you can imagine, add a lot of integrity and design structural strength to the tanks. So they're not going to sag over time, and for that reason I'm not worried that they're not perfectly sitting on the hull floors. However, I did want to go to the trouble of getting spacers or little bearers to put underneath the tanks where they are over the hull floors, so they do have contact on every hull floor, just to give them support. To explain another point also, in last week's video you saw the bearers at each end of the port tank. Now, in case anybody was concerned that some hardwood was being glued to bulkheads to take the weight of the tank, no. The bulk of the weight is actually going to be over the hull floors really, and they're not moving. But I did want to support the ends as well. As I say, wherever I could, I wanted to support them. And to mention again, the glue that I'm using, the Fixtech FMP 100, once that's on whatever you're gluing, it is not letting go. You're going to wreck whatever it's glued to. It's stronger than the substrate it's joined to. Those blocks on the end, they're glued with a very, very strong product, but the tank's load is mostly being taken by the hull floors. And I've put those bearers on each end to add to the support. So it's an accumulative bearing over the full length of each tank. And another thing to point out is there is just millimeters of difference between each hull floor. It's not a big deal. It's how things ended up in the construction phase. But I've got 2 thicknesses of the insertion rubber. I've got this 1 millimeter rubber, 3 millimeter, they are at 25 millimeters or 1 inch. And then I've got this 3 millimeter at 2 inch wide. So that can be used to even out the hull floors to provide a nice even surface to put the cabin sole pieces onto, so that the cabin sole sits on rubber and not directly onto the painted steel. And another thing I wanted to show was the length of these saloon seating areas. So obviously there's ample room for the likes of me. There's essentially 2 meters of length on each side, or 6.5 feet, and I'm sure that would cater to the majority of the globe's population. I'll have a lee cloth on this side, so this will be a great sea berth with plenty of room and plenty of width too.
We're running out of light, time is changing day to night, lines are fading out, and we're dancing in the park. Nothing's wrong with when I start, 'cause you look better in the dark. Oh, counting days, I made it through without someone like you. We're running out of light, time is changing day to night.
So on to the last stage, well, almost, for these beautiful cabin sole pieces. I have my trusty compressor. I'll be spraying the polyurethane onto these. They're going to get 3 coats of polyurethane, and then they'll get another coat which I'll actually roll on with a non-skid. So the first thing I need to do is just give them a very quick sand just to roughen the surface to allow the polyurethane a good bonding surface to the epoxy. I'm using 240 grit for that, and so the process will be a quick run over each panel with the sander, blow them off, give them a wipe with a damp sponge, and then away we go with the polyurethane. The great thing about polyurethane is that I'll be able to actually blow all of these coats on, the 3 coats, within about 30 minutes of the prior one. So blow one on, 30 minutes later, another coat. It's really great. I am a little bit concerned about today. As you can hear, there is a bit of breeze blowing. That does worry me. I'm going to see how things go. And when I mentioned almost the last stage, the only other thing beyond that will be once the panels are in the boat, I'll need to get some latches to lock these in place. That brings me to some comments I've had not only from last week's video but from prior videos regarding a couple of things that I can answer to. But I do thank you for raising those questions and queries in your comments. It's terrific, and it's not only good because you remind me about things that I might not have explained or covered or even be thinking about, but it's also good for other people to read the comments, and then they can also follow up with the questioning. So one question, as I mentioned, regards the panels once they're in the boat. Yes, they will be secured, absolutely. I haven't yet decided what sort of latches, but I will have latches. In a panel like this, it's likely to be 3, one on each corner here and one in the middle here, so that they're not going to go anywhere. Another question that quite a few people actually raised in the prior video is, aren't I going to coat the edges? I have. In fact, I mentioned that at the beginning of the video. I mentioned that the tops will be getting 3 coats of epoxy, as will the edges, and 2 on the bottom. I didn't show that because that's covered in several previous videos, and I just didn't think it was worthwhile covering that. Maybe I should have. But to make the point, yes, there's 3 coats of epoxy on all of the edges, and so these panels are encapsulated in epoxy. And the reason for that, just to say again, is because my whole approach with building Mistress is I want to do things once. Yes, there'll be some maintenance, but where I can, I'm doing the best I possibly can to do things once so that I won't have an endless stream of big maintenance issues down the track. I want to go sailing.
Time is changing day and you keep asking why. I'm out of control. Oh, my body and my soul don't wanna be whole. But for you, I'm just unknown, and you're not that someone who will find my heart and bring peace to my mind. So move on, 'cause I will find the way on my own. Now life is happening and I don't wanna miss a thing. Letting go is not a sin. Oh, counting days, I made it through without someone like
Right, well here's the game plan, team. I've wiped these all down, so they're all ready for the polyurethane top coat. I will now get changed into my painting shirt. I've got all the gear there to mix up the batch. Here's the 20 litres of aqua coat with its X linker. So I'll get changed, mix up some aqua coat and get started.
We're running out of light. Time is changing day to night. And you keep asking why. I'm out of control. My body and my soul don't wanna be whole. For you I'm just unknown. And you're not that someone who will find my heart and bring peace to my mind. So move on. Oh, 'cause I will find the way on my own. Oh, I don't wanna be running from you, but I know what I'm running from. Oh, you keep saying fine, but I'm not in time. No, not this time. 'Cause I will find a way on my own. 'Cause I am out of control. My body and my soul don't wanna be whole. I don't wanna be for you, I'm just unknown.
I am a bit nervous actually because it doesn't look as good as it did before I sanded all that nice glossy epoxy, but that first coat is just what's called a dust-on coat, so it just goes on light and it does look a bit sort of smoky. I've been assured that the more coats that you put on, the glossier it gets. Fingers crossed. I don't know what's happened, and this is pretty damn disappointing, but the polyurethane that I put on yesterday has not worked. There's problems. This is really not nice or good. As you can see, there's whiteness, milkiness all through the panels. This is not a light reflection. All these white patches here are not light reflections, that's milkiness. It's in every panel. So this is the morning after, and as I said yesterday when I was coating these, that there was a bit of milkiness or haziness, and I thought it was just in that first sort of dusting coat. I was in touch with the company yesterday, and thankfully and graciously they were actually back in touch with me, being a Sunday. They sort of talked me through it, saying it should be okay, just give it some time. But clearly that's not the case. The other thing is it sort of hasn't really dried. It's kind of it's sort of like Glad wrap. It's yeah, there's an area on one panel I'll show you where it had a raised lump, and I just rubbed it with my finger and it just started peeling like Glad wrap. I don't know what's going on, but I've sent a message to say I need to meet with them this morning. I'll take some panels, I'll take the product and go and discuss with them what this problem is. But this is pretty disappointing after all the work and effort I've put into these to arrive at this sort of result right at the end of the panels where I thought I was there and all I was doing was the last little bit. Whew. So let's see what they're going to say.
'Cause I will find the way
And people,
on my own.
things do get worse. This has really caused me a problem before getting on top of it and getting better. Please like, subscribe, hit that bell and share. I'd really appreciate that.
Heart and bring peace to my mind.